Chapter 6. Made of Stone. Clara. With each stroke of Kase Shackley's fine sable paintbrush, the wine-colored rose petals materialized. Oh, how she missed the flowers blooming in the gardens of her family's estate. Each new layer of paint, of highlight, of shadow, evoked memories of summer days, paintbrush in hand, easel ready to collect her thoughts. As she sat years later in the parlor of her townhouse, Clara could nearly taste the sweet, warm breeze coming up from the southern river. The roses themselves were the pride and joy of the Davy name. Clara always loved tending to them when she needed a break from painting. It was a wonder her prim and proper mother allowed her to do either. Maybe she knew her daughter needed an outlet for the life path she would follow. Painting and gardening kept her hands and mind calm. She'd been taught from a young age that emotions were private and not for the public eye. A lady of the Davy family had to be her husband's strength, his confidant. She must be strong. She must be made of stone. It was a job Clara cherished, for she'd dreamed of becoming a wife and mother for as long as she could remember. Her unborn baby rolled in her stomach, its little elbow sliding along the side, hitting something it wasn't supposed to. Clara sucked in a breath, hand going to the spot near her hip. "You running out of room, little one?" Blessed stars, she wanted to get this baby out. If it wasn't her ribs, it was her bladder, her kidney, and so forth. It was an equally joyous and exhausting time in her life. Her home was quiet in the late afternoon while her husband was away at the office. The vines and blooms of plants surrounded her, making her feel almost as if she were in that garden back home. It was a place she felt comfortable, even in the middle of busy Kaivenna. She wished Jove could find the same serenity. At least he was going into work instead of holing up in his study, refusing to come out even to eat. While she loved having him home, it was doing terrible things to his mental state. He could barely walk around a corner without stumbling upon yet another reminder of everything he'd lost. And she loved Jove too much to allow him to spiral down the road he was headed. She was his rock, his confidant, his strength. They'd gone through this when Anna had passed, but Zeke was different. Clara set her paintbrush aside and wiped the stray tear trickling down her cheek. Seeing Jove drink through his sorrow was almost more than she could bear. What if he never recovered from this? What if he continued to hide behind the walls he didn't realize he was building, brick by brick? Her stomach tightened painfully and unexpectedly, putting pressure on her already aching back. She placed a hand over the center of her stomach and pushed the breath out of her lungs through her mouth, forcing her face to relax. Another few seconds, and the tightness faded. False contraction. Clara was still a month out from when they expected the baby to arrive, yet these practice contractions had only intensified over the last week. Clara put it down to stress. She looked over to the window where she'd set her favorite flash portrait. It was a relatively new technology, using light to recreate a scene onto special paper. The history books spoke of more advanced gadgetry that allowed the subjects in the portraits to move, but like almost everything from First Earth, it was also lost to time. The flash portrait was of her and Jove on the night he'd proposed. They looked so happy, so carefree. Her husband's smile was a bittersweet memory, his arm pulling her to his chest. Wasn't she enough? Couldn't she help him get through this? She reached out and touched the frame. Everything would be okay. It had to be. She was a Davy by birth, a Shackley by marriage. She was strong. Chapter 7. The Use of Dinner Forks. Hallie. A week after accepting Kase's invitation to dinner, Hallie fingered the navy lace cuff of a dress in the tailor's shop. The pattern on this particular one created a swirling design, almost like sea waves all the way up the sleeves and the bodice, to a clear mesh-like collar covering the shoulders. She peeked at the price tag and felt ill. 8 gold tenors for a dress? While present Hallie could technically afford it with the sum from the Eudora mission, she would need the funds for when she returned to university. Even if she did purchase the dress, where would she wear it? To Kase's fancy dinner the next night? Her stomach churned at the thought. Why in the blazes had she said yes? "You've been making that same face for the past half hour. Is it because you still haven't heard back from your parents?" Petra twisted to the side in front of a trio of floor-length mirrors near the back of the dress shop. Soft, incandescent light flashed off her gemstone earrings as she glanced at Hallie. The pedestal she stood upon brought her to Hallie's height. Hallie dropped the price tag. "I know the fort's troops defeated that Cerul force, but I can't help but think... I haven't heard anything. I feel like I should have heard something by now." She coughed. "But it's not just that." Hallie stepped around the attendant, pinning the hem of Petra's new evening gown. It was a deep red, like the color of late autumn maple leaves, with a standing collar, and showed off her curves. The dress was a nod to Petra's first Earth ancestors. Another beautiful dress for another frivolous party. This one was a betrothal dinner. The wealthy liked their parties, and Hallie couldn't believe she'd been sucked into attending one. Petra patted back an invisible strand of hair. "What is it?" Hallie looked down at her own attire. Plain brown trousers tucked into her boots. She pulled at her worn lace shirt cuffs. "Well, it's that... Promise you won't freak out?" "Now I'm nervous." "It's nothing, really." Hallie swept her hands behind her back and paced in front of the mirror. "I didn't know what to say at first, but for some reason I ended up saying yes to a fancy dinner. And now I'm out of sorts because it's not something I'd ever wanted or even dreamed of going to, and I don't know what I'll wear nor anything about anything at all, and I'm sure there are proper table manners I don't know, and... Hallie, breathe." Petra held up her hand. "Explain slower, please. You've been invited to a dinner party? Where?" Hallie watched as the attendant stuck another pin in the dress's hem. "Shackley Manor." The attendant swore softly as Petra jumped. Her eyes, reflected in the center mirror, were as large as First Moon. "Shackley Manor? Did I hear you correctly?" She turned to the attendant, who was sucking on an injured finger. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Moffat. I forgot you were there." Moffat shook her head. "It's quite all right, Miss Lieber. I didn't expect—" Petra cut in. "What do you mean you're going to a dinner party at Shackley Manor?" Hallie gave Moffat an apologetic smile. "Well, Kase asked me to go with him. He told me it's to make up for something a little while back." Petra squealed, and Moffat stuck her finger again. The attendant inhaled sharply and stood, curtsying. "I need to grab a few more pins, Miss Lieber. I shall return shortly." She whipped out of the room, her dark skirts flipping around the corner as she shut the door to the back room. Petra took Hallie's hands in hers. "You can borrow one of my dinner gowns if you don't have anything." Hallie eyed Petra's wide hips and pulled her hands back. "I don't think anything you have would fit me." Petra tapped her chin and hopped down from the pedestal. A small clattering followed as the pins in the hem of her skirt scraped along the stone floor. She led Hallie over to the back wall of dresses. "Tomorrow night?" Hallie nodded. Petra shuffled through the garments and paused at the one Hallie had been inspecting earlier. She pulled it off the rack and held it up by its wooden hanger. "What about this one? You've always liked pretty lace, and with this deep blue against your pale skin you'll look positively divine." "I don't think you understand." Petra checked the price tag. "And it's only 8 gold tenors? A steal!" Hallie clenched her fists and tempered her frustration. "You do understand that's enough to pay for 3 months' rent in the wealthiest part of the lower city, right? Don't you have money now or something? From that research job you did up in the mountains?" Still an incredibly lame story, but it continued to hold up. Petra and Ellis were too trusting. "I need to save it for when I go back to school." Petra shoved the dress in Hallie's arms. Yes, but this is only one dress, and you need it for tomorrow. If you buy this, I'll let you borrow a pair of my slippers that would match perfectly. My boots would be fine. Trust me, you'll want to look your best. I'll even bring my maid, and she can do your hair and makeup." Petra's eyes sparkled in the light, and Hallie sighed. Her friend was trying to be kind, and Hallie knew she hadn't meant to be bossy or insulting. Hallie studied the dress again. Underneath the deep blue lace of the bodice was a champagne-colored silk layer that continued into the skirt. With Hallie's pale, freckled complexion and red hair, she really would look beautiful in it. The lace was soft and silky under her fingertips, and Hallie couldn't very well show up in her trousers and long leather jacket. She looked back into Petra's waiting eyes. "Could I also borrow a cloak?" Petra's smile lit up the room as she squealed once more. "Of course! Now go put it on. I'll get Moffat to help you button up the back when she returns." Hallie rolled her eyes, but headed toward the small, curtained fitting room. Good stars! She was going to spend 8 gold tenors on a dress. Hallie knew her bedchamber was rather small, but it was minuscule with 3 people packed inside. Petra was fretting over the state of Hallie's hair, dress, and whether she should wear the navy or champagne slippers lined with jewels. Hallie hid her growing irritation as her friend also held up various jeweled drop earrings. "I think the pearls would be best. They bring out the gold in your eyes. Yes, I think that will work. I have a matching necklace, but I don't want to take it away from that gorgeous neckline." While Petra fluttered about, her maid, a woman near Hallie's age named Vera, inspected Hallie's eyebrows with metal tweezers. Hallie tried not to flinch as the woman pulled at stray hairs. It wasn't easy. Every pluck was like a tiny bee sting. After bullying her eyebrows into shape, Vera finished her masterpiece with a few well-placed strokes, defining Hallie's features, a little bit of dark powder lining her eyelids, some light rouge on her cheeks. Though it was more than Hallie had ever done for herself in her life, only adding the lid powder herself when attending the theater, she found she didn't necessarily mind. Vera's steady hand proved she'd done this 1,000 times, and each addition only brought life to Hallie's complexion. Was this what Petra did each day before heading out? Did she have Vera or someone else make sure she was readily presentable no matter the occasion, whether it be a quick jaunt to class or an estate dinner? As Vera double-checked her work, a knock sounded at the heavy wooden door in the adjoining common room, a luxury in an apartment this small. Kase. Hallie patted her hair. It looked elegant with its braid-decorated twist. No messy, stray hairs marred her pale skin. Petra set aside one of the many cloaks she'd brought for Hallie to try. "I'll see to it. You finish up here." Hallie nodded, and Vera pulled out a slender brush and jar of lip stain for the final touch. Peeking in the cloudy mirror propped up on her side table, Hallie hesitated. "You sure I need that?" Vera raised a blonde eyebrow. "Trust me, Miss Walker." Hallie waved her hand, and Vera dipped the brush into the deep red stain. The brush tickled as she painted Hallie's lips. Soft laughter came from behind the door to Hallie's bedchamber before Petra entered and shut the door with a snap. Hallie caught the grin on her face in the looking-glass. Petra's smile only grew as she set the dark blue slippers on the floor so Hallie could step into them. They matched the dress perfectly. "First, you look ravishing, dear. And second, he's here." Hallie tied on her scarlet maiden belt and tossed the borrowed silk cloak around her shoulders. She dried her sweating hands on the material, though they slid right off. Blast it. She turned to Vera. "Thank you for your help." Vera curtsied. "Wait, your gloves." Hallie shook her head. "No, I don't need any." But the woman wasn't to be denied, so Hallie found herself pulling on simple white gloves that reached her elbows. At least no one would feel how sweaty her palms were, though they might notice the missing little finger. When Hallie was ready, Petra led the way to the door and opened it wide. The common room wasn't anything to speak of, just a small parlor with a wood-fire stove, a single fraying sofa Hallie rarely used, and haphazard bookshelves full of tomes she no longer cared enough about. She'd tried again and again, but nothing helped. Frankenstein still lay on her bedside table. She truly only cared about one book, and that one was gone. Her copy of The Odyssey had been in the satchel that fell through the gate. Hallie tried not to dwell on its loss, nor the empty feeling of not having her brother's hand-me-down pocket watch, which she had lost in the ruins where Ebba died. The light from the gas lantern on the side table added a soft touch to Kase's features. The bit of warmth from the dying fire in the stove wasn't enough to heat the room, which was what Hallie told herself had sent goosebumps flittering across her skin. Kase leaned against one of the shelves and fiddled with the rim of his bowler hat. His trousers and suit coat were black as a cloudless night sky, and his dark locks shone with hair gel, though there were still some stubborn pieces trying to escape. Hallie smiled. Kase answered with his own grin that sent a spark of electricity down to each and every fingertip and toe. "Seems we both clean up well." Hallie rolled her eyes, trying to ignore the heat creeping up her neck. He took her offered hand and touched his lips to it. The spot tingled through her gloves. "Vera works wonders." Kase raised a brow. "I don't think it's solely whoever Vera is." "Vera's my maid. The best Kavenna finishing school had to offer." Petra stepped up next to Hallie and put a hand on her shoulder, shaking the girl out of her thoughts. "Take care of my friend here. She's a bit nervous." "Petra?" "What?" Petra asked, her eyebrows drawing together in a frown. Hallie tugged at the cloak's tie. "Thank you for your help." Petra leaned closer to whisper in Hallie's ear, her voice taut with unbridled excitement, each word short and fizzing with energy. "Don't forget a single solitary detail about tonight." Hallie clenched her teeth in a pained grimace as Kase smirked, overhearing the words. She went to grab her satchel, but Petra stopped her again. "Hallie, don't take that for moon's sake." "It's quite all right," Kase said, stepping up to Hallie. "You without your sketchbook wouldn't be right." Warmth spread across her cheeks. "I need it to carry my key." Petra rolled her eyes. "Fine, fine. Promise you'll hand it off at the door with your cloak, please." Hallie swallowed the retort, begging to be unleashed from her painted lips. "Thank you again, Petra." With that, she slung her satchel over her shoulder and tucked her hand into the crook of Kase's offered arm. His muscles tensed beneath her fingers as he shoved his hat onto his head, messing his hair further, and led her out into the chilly evening. Hallie gasped at the sight of cotton-like snow falling from the sky, whirling in the light from the lanterns that led to Market Square. Without thinking of what she might look like, she opened her mouth wide and caught a few snowflakes on her tongue. The cold bite of the ice melted away with her body heat. She caught sight of Kase's smirk. "What? At least you're better at catching those than caramels." "I feel like I should be offended by that," Hallie grumbled, although she sincerely appreciated the banter. She didn't know what to do with the feelings bubbling their way up into her chest as snowflakes danced on the brim of his bowler, the shoulders of his fancy jacket, and the bit of stubble lining his jaw. "I meant it as the highest of compliments, of course." "You're in a good mood." Relaxing at his playful tone, Hallie poked his shoulder. Kase pulled her in the direction of the main street, the heels of his shiny loafers clicking against the wet cobblestones. At the end of the lane, a motor coach was idling. Kase opened the door and gestured for her to climb inside. "It's the first time I'll have someone joining me in mocking impossibly snooty dignitaries. Specifically the Rubicon ambassador, though this event is technically in his honor." "These things are usually a bore?" Kase slid in beside her, closing his eyes for a moment before taking off his hat and fiddling with the brim. "They always are. But like I said the other day, the food is worth it. Most of the time. To the manor, Avery." "Of course, Master Kase." Hallie set her satchel at her feet and smoothed her elegant skirt. She tried not to focus on Kase's cologne. It smelled like wood smoke and sweet tobacco and was doing funny things to her heart. "Will there be chocolate?" Mother did mention some sort of chocolate delicacy. It'll be delicious, no doubt. She smiled. Then I can't wait. They made more inconsequential small talk for a good bit of the drive, the buildings casting shadows as they rolled by. The conversation flowed easily, and Hallie's posture relaxed as they drove. Even so, she ran over the plan in her head. She'd only come up with it the day before, and she didn't know if Kase would go for it, but when the conversation lagged at last, she prayed her words were as persuasive as she'd thought they'd be. He's impulsive. Surely he'd be all for flying to Stoneset. And the Yalvs are settling in rather quickly. No need to worry there. Salder will understand. As she gathered her fleeting bits of courage, city lights filtering in through the window lined Kase's silhouette with gold. She traced a pattern in the smooth leather of the seat. The motion calmed her. Hallie swallowed. I have something to ask you. Yes? He turned, the angle of his jaw and cheekbone all the more pronounced in the half-light. The stubble was not long enough to be considered scruffy, as if he'd forgotten to shave for a few days. Stars, he looks good. Well, her throat tightened. His eyes were dark in the shadowed interior of the motor coach. Her teeth were sharp as she bit her lip. It's that, what I wanted to ask was... She stopped when the looming griffins of the Shackley Manor gate leered at her through his window. He looked at her expectantly before turning. Oh, we're here. Didn't take nearly as long as I thought. What were you trying to say? She tore her eyes away from the accusing stone stairs. Never mind. It can wait. You sure? She gave him the best smile she could muster, though she had an inkling he saw right through it. It's nothing, really. Coward. The dull rumble of a dozen motor coaches met her ears, and, grateful for the reprieve, she peeked out the window. Just how many people are here? Kase tapped the toe of his loafer on the floor. Well, the Stradats and their respective families. He turned toward her, ticking them off on his fingers. And then the Rubicon ambassador and his son, quite ugly if you ask me. Someone from the Watch, probably the High Guardswoman Hetty Coppin. Then there's several of the city council members from here in Kyvena. With each name, the knots in Hallie's stomach tightened. The entirety of the Jaydian government, their families, and any other important persons in Kyvena would be in attendance. Just lovely. Absolutely lovely. Feeling incredibly grateful for the expensive gown hugging her form, and for Petra, Hallie kicked her satchel further under the seat. She breathed out her nose as calmly as she could. Howls? Kase asked. She looked up into his dark blue eyes. They were soft. You feeling okay? The entire blasted country is here to watch me use the wrong fork at dinner. Kase took her gloved hand. He did it without hesitation, as casual as you please, except it only made Hallie's heart hammer even more. All the emotions, all the nerves. Stars, stars, stars. Relax, Kase said gently, giving her hand a slight squeeze. The beauty of so many people is you won't stand out. We're probably seated near Jove and Clara, so you'll have some normal people to talk to. Besides, I'll stop you before you use the meat fork to eat your salad. An easy mistake to make, but I'm rather accomplished at the use of dinner forks. Hallie squeezed his hand back. You swear? On my honor as a gentleman. Hallie snorted and slipped her hand out of his. It felt cold without his warmth. Kase grinned, his straight white teeth flashing. When Avery pulled to a stop, Kase unlatched the door and stepped out, adjusting his tie and the lapels of his suit jacket. He turned back to Hallie. You ready? She took a deep breath. Everything would be all right. She'd eat dinner, enjoy the night, and, on the way back, lay out the details of her plan. She only needed faith. Slipping her hand into his, he helped her out of the coach and into the gentle glow of the waiting night. Chapter 8. Better Me Than Jove. Kase. For once, walking through Shackley Manor's ornate entrance didn't intimidate Kase. For once, he didn't feel alone. For once, he might enjoy the night spent in the company of the pernicious, wealthy elites. He tucked Hallie's hand in the crook of his elbow and nodded to the butler, Thoro, after making it over the threshold. When Hallie had first walked into the sitting room of her apartment, his heart skipped one too many beats. The blue dress set off her eyes, and the lower neckline and intricate hairstyle allowed him to appreciate the natural curve of her neck. He'd had to swallow hard and blink at least once to regain his composure. He'd found many a girl pretty in a nice dress, yet Hallie was something more. Even though he liked the braids and twists, he missed the messy hairstyle with the pencil stuck in it. It was odd not seeing her bent over her sketchpad, a bit of charcoal smudged on her cheek. He hadn't seen her sketching in months, but that picture was just right. He glanced sideways at her as she handed her cloak and gloves to the butler. She'd left her satchel in the car, but he was sure she'd draw every remembered detail later. Her face was stone-like and reminded him a little of those animated Yalvan statues. Was he wrong for bringing her? Would she hate him after the night ended? He leaned over and whispered in her ear, "The food will be worth it, I promise. That is, if Mother hasn't ordered that stars-awful lemon basil soup she's been favoring lately." Hallie inspected him for a moment, maybe to see if he was in earnest or not, before she finally gave him the ghost of a smile. He nodded to the servant, who opened the door to the parlor. Judging by the number of people inside, he and Hallie were some of the last guests to arrive. He steered her toward the drink cart, avoiding conversation with everyone. He eyed his father, speaking with Stradat Loeffler by the roaring fire. Kase was surprised the ancient white-haired man had been able to stay awake so long. The servant near the drink cart bowed as Kase and Hallie approached. Kase nodded to him. "Gin. What would you like, House?" She shook her head. No, I'm fine." Having a drink in hand is the best way to avoid answering an unwanted question in a hover-wreck of a conversation. "Is there a non-alcoholic option?" Kase raised an eyebrow. "I think we have sparkling cherry water." "I'll have that." The servant mixed both drinks, pouring each into a fine-spun glass. He topped Hallie's off with a few cherries for aesthetics. Kase took his, the ice clinking against the sides. He took a sip. The subtle taste of pine and sweet berries wasn't terrible. "I wish Mother would serve ale." Hallie quietly observed the fray as they wove through the guests. Kase spotted Stradat Millicent Sarson, her facial scar catching in the light from the chandelier above. She entertained the Rubicon ambassador, probably giving him orders on how best to run his country, even though he wasn't part of the oligarchy. Kase and Hallie passed near the fireplace, and his father's stare burned through the back of his head. "Ignore him." Kase led Hallie over to the freestanding shelves where his mother kept many of her glass figurines. These were the ones not important enough to sit on the side tables next to the many finely upholstered davenports. Dark-stained bookshelves and still-life portraits lined the other available wall space in the room. Kase's grandmother had purchased the latter from a famous painter who had an affinity for various fruits and beasts. Kase thought the man must have been drunk on Maselbury rum the entirety of his career, as no one in their right mind would paint tigers posing with apples. Curiously, none of the art contained griffins. His grandmother must have been tired of seeing the things around the manor. Hallie took an experimental sip of her drink and smiled. "This is the best sparkling water I've ever tasted." Kase swigged his gin. "We Shackleys pride ourselves on offering only the best. It would be a shame if you'd only had decent sparkling water." "An insult, of course." "Absolutely." She smiled before taking another drink. Kase's shoulders relaxed a smidge. Tense Hallie unnerved him. It reminded him of the time right after Ebba had died on the mission, and other memories he'd rather not revisit. She glanced down at the shelves. Oh, this is a beautiful etagere. She ran a hand over the carved design of the shelf. She bent slightly and inspected the tiny glass sculptures. I love these, too. After Mother reads a book she particularly enjoys, she has another trilogy commissioned. The etagere thereon is from one of the republics on the other side of Tevrubica. Can't remember its name. The figures are exquisite, she whispered, bending slightly to inspect one of the creatures from an old Jaydian folk tale Kase had forgotten the name of. He only remembered being horrified by the description of the monsters as his mother read the story to him and his siblings. The vile things had claws, and their too many eyes reminded him of spiders. Of course, the story had been one of Anna's favorites, which was another reason Kase tried to forget it. Where does she commission them from? Kase looked over the crowd, trying to spot his brother and Clara. Plenty of beaded gowns and tailored suits decorated the parlor, but no one wore Jove's ever-present scowl. Clara draws the figures herself and hands the plans off to a glassblower in the lower city. Clara? Jove's wife. I think you'd have a lot to talk about with both of you being artists and all. She paints mostly. Kase turned back to Hallie. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw his mother weaving around one of the side tables and a few of the important dinner guests. Her elegant, yet simple tiara glittered in her dark hair and matched the silver gown brushing the tips of her slippers. Miss Walker, what a lovely surprise, his mother said, setting her own drink on a nearby shelf sans miniature sculptures. When Kase mentioned he'd be bringing a guest, I didn't realize it was you, dear. She pulled Hallie in for a quick hug and then held her out at arm's length. Kase blinked. His mother had only met Hallie once. He tapped his fingers on his glass. I thought I'd told you I'd asked her. His mother quirked a dark brow. I would have remembered if you were bringing a lady to dinner. I thought it might have been Ben or... She trailed off, and her words hung in the air like the chill outside. She didn't know details. Only that, like Zeke, Skibbs hadn't returned. She had no idea he was alive, much less working for the Cerulens. Pain rippled across her face, but it was gone in a flash. What I was trying to say is that it's high time my Kase brought a woman around, and I adore you very much, Miss Walker. Kase's neck burned as Hallie fumbled for words. Thank you, Lady Celeste. Less, please. Hallie smiled shyly. Of course, Les. And please call me Hallie. She nodded to the figurines. These are lovely, and I like that each has to do with literature. His mother's hands dropped from Hallie's shoulders as she put a hand to her chest. I treasure these little baubles nearly as much as the books themselves. I have about 100 more upstairs in my library, but my favorites are here in the parlor for everyone to admire. Kase glanced around the tables, searching for a specific one he liked. Mother, where's King Arthur? I think Hallie would like to see that one. Another pained look crossed her face as she picked up her drink. It fell a little while ago, shattered. There was something else there, something his mother didn't want to say. It was the way she said it, like she'd caught a sudden cold, but before he could press the issue, she continued, her voice light and airy once more. Either way, you must come back to visit soon, Miss Walker. When you do, I'll have Mr. Thorell give you a tour, as you weren't able to see the rest of the manor last time you were here. Mother, Kase interrupted, trying to get off the topic that made his stomach tighten. Have you seen Jove and Clara yet? As if summoned, the door to the parlor opened and Jove stepped through. He was different than when Kase had seen him earlier in the week. His eyes were less wild. Clara was on his arm, her budding stomach evident even in the loose folds of her purple gown. Jove grabbed a drink before spotting Kase. He guided Clara over. Les embraced Clara as she took her hand from Jove's elbow. I didn't know if you'd be able to make it, being so close to your due date, but I'm glad you did. Clara rubbed her stomach. For a second I didn't think I'd be able to, but the baby finally decided to behave. Everything all right? His mother asked, her brows drawing together. Yes, the midwife said it was normal, so I'm not worried. Clara responded, her brown eyes soft and earnest. She patted her stomach.
We might have a stubborn one on our hands. He wouldn't be a Shackley if he wasn't.
Les laughed and gave Clara's arm another squeeze. Mother, please. Jove shook his head. Besides, we won't know the sex until the baby arrives. He turned to Hallie. Good to see you, Miss Walker. Hallie dipped in a small curtsy, and Kase snorted. She glared at him and rose, turning back to his brother.
And you as well.
Jove gave Kase an irritated look. Good stars, Kase, she's just being polite.
Yeah, but it's you.
A muscle twitched in Jove's jaw before he caught Clara's hand. Miss Walker, I don't believe you've met my wife. Clara, this is Miss Hallie Walker. She's a renowned scholar in the university and helped the watch last fall. The way he described it sounded rather strange, as if he knew he wasn't supposed to say anything but nearly spilled the secret. Kase couldn't help but notice the lean of the Rubicon ambassador's shining bald head at the words. Kase cleared his throat. Hallie is an artist too, Clara.
Yes, Hallie said, her hands folded in front of her. Kase was telling me you like to paint?
Clara's dark brows rose.
First names? My, Kase, you've been holding out on us.
Kase choked on his drink. The alcohol burned his nose and throat as he coughed violently. Hallie's face was nearly as red as her hair. Her words came out rushed.
We got to know each other really well. Where I grew up in Stonesit, you see, we're not too formal with names.
She took a large gulp of her sparkling cherry water. Clara gave Kase an appraising look before turning back to Hallie.
Oh, I'm teasing. I'm sure Les would agree that it's simply nice to finally meet the woman Kase has spoken so much about.
It's true, his mother chimed in. Jove's lip curled. He even tried to gel his hair. Hallie's face had now surpassed the color of the cherries in her sparkling water. Kase was certain his mirrored hers. He elbowed his brother in the arm and murmured, I didn't want a lecture about my curls from Mother. Jove laughed into his glass. His mother reached up and twisted one of the curls into place.
It does look nice, dear.
Kase batted her hand away. Mother?
Clara took Hallie's hand in both of hers. Anyway, Miss Walker, I do love meeting other creatives such as myself. So tell me, what medium do you prefer?
The women's conversation descended into one of paints, charcoals, and types of canvas. Hallie's face returned to its normal color. Kase hoped his would soon. He hadn't thought he'd spoken much about her, but he never shared much about his past relationships. Not that he was in a relationship. No, Hallie was just a friend. A very pretty friend, whose slim figure was evident in the evening gown she wore. A friend he felt rather comfortable around, but... Kase finished off his gin. His mother glanced around, the jewels on her tiara winking like stars in a clear night sky. She turned back to her sons.
In more serious matters, I need to talk with both of you later. Your father... Well, I won't go into the details here, obviously, but I'm worried.
Worried about what? Jove asked. Kase rolled his eyes.
She said she can't go into details here, you dullcop. Boys...
His mother groaned as Jove opened his mouth to retort, but before she could say anything else, a servant appeared beside her. The man's green uniform was spotless and unwrinkled as he bowed. Lady Celeste, dinner is ready. Shall I inform the Lord Capitan? His mother jumped a little, but she quickly regained her composure.
It wasn't supposed to be served until 7, and it's only...
She checked the mechanical wooden clock tower in the far corner of the room.
I believe that says 15 to the hour?
The serving man's face reddened beneath his ruddy hair. Of course. I will inform Mr. Thoreau and Chef Irma that you would like to eat in 15 minutes. His mother put a hand on his arm.
No, we'll go in now. The Lord Capitan will be more upset if the food is cold.
Shall I inform him? The servant asked, though Kase could tell from the slight widening of his eyes that he'd much rather face torture in the bowels of the Cerulene King's dungeon than approach the Lord Capitan with the news dinner would be served 15 minutes earlier than planned.
No, I'll tell him.
His mother strode toward Harlan, who had joined a group of government officials that included members of Kaivena's city council. Anderson Enright was among them, the son of the late Reuben Enright. The current rumor was he'd take his father's place on the council in the next election. He'd been one of Jove's schoolmates and good friends. As his mother joined the group, Anderson looked up at Jove and Kase. He smiled and walked over with an air of casual grace. "Well, mates, it's been ages." Jove's face broke into a smile as he shook the man's umber hand. Kase had always thought Anderson was too happy and too good-looking to be genuine. Maybe it was simply Kase's own dour demeanor. "And you, Anderson, I don't believe I've seen you since your father's passing." Jove's sharp elbow jabbed Kase in the arm, and he ground out, "Yes, I was sorry to hear about Lord Reuben." Kase avoided Jove's glare and put on his best sympathetic expression as Anderson nodded. "Thank you. We've each dealt with it in our own ways, Mother the worst of us, but we're managing. I'm thankful to have learnt as much as I did from him, and I'm planning on continuing his legacy in the council." "Except you must be elected, you dullcop. What makes you think the position is yours already?" Jove held up his glass. "I'm sure the council would be all the better with you on it. I've heard talk about what you've done for the lower city, and with your impending marriage to the Liber heiress." Kase tuned them out and scanned the room to see if he could find anything more interesting to bide the time until his mother convinced Harlan to go to dinner early. A travesty, of course. It wasn't going well if Kase were to judge success by the deepening lines on his father's face, but in a moment his curt nod preceded the subtle relief flooding his mother's shoulders. Harlan cleared his throat. "We invite you to join us for dinner. Butler, please lead our guests into the dining hall." Following his words, Thoreau appeared before the doors leading to the dining hall from the parlor. Hallie whispered something to Clara and joined Kase. "May I take my drink with me?" Kase smirked. "That good, huh?" They joined the queue to the dining hall. The conversations around them were like soft murmurs in the dark. Hallie flashed him a quick grin. "Is that a yes?" "Wine is served at dinner, and it's a breach of etiquette to bring in your before-dinner drinks. Normally I'd say blast the rules, but—" Hallie knocked the rest of it back like a day laborer deep in his cups. Kase laughed as she smacked her lips upon finishing and left the glass with a nearby servant. She gave the woman a small nod. "Thank you." Kase shook his head as he handed his own glass over. "I didn't know you were such a fan of sparkling water." "Just one of the many fascinating facets of my personality." She turned slightly toward him as he led her to seats across from Jove and Clara. Kase was forced to sit next to Anderson. "Glad you aren't so nervous anymore." She shrugged as servants pulled out their chairs. Hallie sat, lifting her skirt so it didn't get caught in the legs of the chair. A server leaned forward to fill her wineglass. "Oh, I don't—" But the hush falling over the room like a dusting of new snow cut her off as Harlan stood from his seat at the far end of the table. Kase traced his finger along the rim of his wineglass. The dark liquid caught the light with each tiny ripple. "I thank you for your presence here to celebrate our most recent accomplishment in the fight against Cerulene. Ambassador Gustave Crozier was vital in our negotiations with the United Rubican States. Everyone please join me in a toast to this momentous occasion," Harlan boomed. As one, every dinner attendee raised their glittering glasses in the air. Harlan followed suit. "Thank you, Ambassador Crozier. With Tev Rubica, we can fight this threat at both of our borders. Proch." "Procht." The murmured echo came soon after, and Kase took a sip of his wine. It was warm across the tongue. Hallie hadn't touched her glass. "It's not too bad. Has a bit of a walnut taste," he said as servants brought forth the first course. Hallie's eyes darted to the servers. "Oh, I just... Do you think someone could bring me a sparkling water? The wine is good, I promise." "It's not that I don't believe you," Hallie whispered as bowls of soup were set before them. "I don't drink alcohol." Kase raised his eyebrows. "You don't?" She shook her head. "Not since Jack died." Kase turned to the servant who'd placed the bowl of soup in front of Anderson. "Would you mind bringing the lady a sparkling cherry water?" "She does not like the wine?" Hallie's cheeks pinked as she waved a hand. I'll be fine." Kase touched her shoulder. "The man will bring it with the next course, won't you?" "Yes, Master Kase." "Thank you," Hallie said softly. "You're welcome." The soup course was served, and Kase noticed specks of basil floating on the pearly surface. He groaned. Thank the stars and moons he'd only have to eat a little bit of it. He peeked at Hallie. She grabbed the spoon to the left of the porcelain charger. The senior councilman's wife, seated to Hallie's left, scrunched up her nose. Kase leaned over and whispered, "Right side, right spoon." She hastily corrected her error, her fingers gripping the new utensil a little too hard, judging by the whites of her knuckles. Kase gave her a smile. "The other one is for dessert." Hallie scooped out a bite and blew on it. "Because reusing the same spoon would be a breach of propriety?" Kase tasted his own. His lips puckered. "I despise lemon." "Of course. And make sure you don't finish off the soup. That shows you're too hungry. Granted, with this, it's not going to be difficult." Hallie blinked at the sour kick to the steaming soup. "And if I'm rather hungry?" Kase set his spoon beside the bowl. "That makes you look like you're part of the lower of the... never mind." Hallie's cheeks pinked, but she didn't say anything else. The thought of her not fitting into the world he'd grown up in bothered Kase. He couldn't necessarily explain why, seeing as he'd never fit into it either. He didn't want her to have to suffer the looks or the wagging tongues of the ladies who frequented his mother's entertaining parlor. Lady Les didn't much like them either, but she knew she had to play the game. It kept her distracted from other things. Conversations fluttered around them like soft bird chatter. Kase couldn't decipher the individual words, and he couldn't think of anything else to say to Hallie. Shucks, why was this so hard? The main course arrived, along with Hallie's sparkling water. Kase cut into his steak, his knife slicing through the meat like butter. He wished for a less expensive cut because the words coming from the man's mouth made Kase want to keep sawing away. Anderson leaned toward Kase and lowered his voice so only Kase, Hallie, and Jove could hear. "I've heard the Watch has been keeping tabs on that crazed group of fanatics. I can't remember the name, something about uniting... One world," Jove said a little too loudly. Kase clenched his silverware in his hands as Jove finished off his glass of wine and signaled for another. "Jove," he hissed, "keep your voice down." Kase had heard the rumors, same as Anderson. The group had been initially responsible for some demonstrations in a city near the Lenara Canyon out east. Kase hadn't thought much of them until he'd heard of more demonstrations popping up in bigger cities throughout Jayde. Hallie leaned in. "What's One World?" Jove swirled his newly poured wine and took a gulp as Anderson and the others waited expectantly. Kase bent down in Hallie's ear. "It's a group of rabble-rousers causing a ruckus in some of the other cities. I think I mentioned the other night how they've possibly made their way here." A bit of her flyaway hair tickled his lips when she nodded, her eyes widening a little. He pulled back and tried not to bring a hand to his tingling lips. He eyed his wineglass, half full. He didn't think he could blame alcohol for the sensation. He stuffed a bite of steak into his mouth and chewed. The juicy smokiness was perfect, yet didn't help his predicament. "Cheeky dollcops." Anderson twirled a bite of steak in the juice on his plate. "Does the Watch think this One World will make an appearance here in Kaivenna?" Hesitating, Kase glanced at Jove. His brother set down his glass, the wine sloshing a little, but no drops landed on the cloth. Clara bit her lip, but she didn't say anything as Jove leaned forward, his tie creeping close to what was left of his rosemary potatoes. "I'm not supposed to talk about business outside of the Watch, but..." He glanced down the table. Kase followed his gaze to where Hetty, the head guardswoman, conversed with his mother and another member of the city council. He turned back to Anderson. "I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a little unrest here." Kase ran a hand through his gelled hair. The goop made it feel like it was made of wax. He made a mental note to never try it again. I thought the demonstrations were just a bunch of drunkards yelling obscenities and conspiracy theories at passerby. Anderson shook his head. There's more than a few injured men in the Linara region, particularly. I can't give all the details, of course, but have faith we're doing what we can to prevent anything worse, Jove said. Hallie shifted in her seat, her arm brushing against Kase's and leaving a wave of heat in its wake. Would anyone care to explain more about who or what this group is? Anderson leaned forward a little more so he could see her around Kase's form. Anderson answered, According to their manifesto, they don't believe in the division of countries or kingdoms. They want to take down the government? Hallie asked, her food forgotten beneath her hovering silver utensils. She'd used the correct fork without prompting from Kase. Jove patted his mouth with a cloth napkin. I wouldn't worry about it, Miss Walker. Groups like that come and go like the tide. Every few years or so, another one pops up. His words slurred toward the end. Except this one seems to have some momentum, Kase said. Jove finished off his glass of wine and gestured for a third. The serving man refilled it, a look of unease skittering across his features. Harlan's gaze was so incendiary that Kase could feel it burning into him. It moved to Jove, and a pit opened in Kase's stomach. Jove, I think it's best if you— Nope, Jove plowed on. We'll take care of anything that gets out of hand. Clara put a hand on his arm. Love, I thought this was a celebration. Jove looked down at her hand, then back up to her. Kase tapped out a slight staccato on his knees with his fingers. Finally, Jove set his glass down. Of course. After a few moments in which the silence seemed to be a living, breathing entity, the conversation turned back to frivolous things when the dessert course was served. Anderson talked about how he was tired of snow. Clara shared that she wanted to paint the new species of tiger coming to City Menagerie as soon as it arrived, and Kase and Jove debated the outcome of the most recent Grogan sport match. It's not like Kyvena had a chance, Kase said, scooping out chocolate mousse from a lily-shaped crystalline bowl. The Silver Coast has too many aces. Jove was on his fourth glass of wine, his voice growing louder with each word. I wish I'd gone pro back in my day. Is that so? Anderson laughed. Would you say that was before or after you knocked me in the head with the bat? Who blocked my shot? You admit it was purposeful. Jove laughed loudly, spilling his wine. The red stain looked eerily like blood on the white linen. Clara plucked the drink from his hand and ignored his small groan. She whispered something in his ear. The few Yalvs I've explained the game to want to give Grogan a try, Hallie said. I don't think they'll be professionals anytime soon, but I was incredibly thrilled to hear they want to start settling in, especially since they've only been here a few weeks. Anderson coughed, choking on his dessert. It's bad enough they're taking jobs in the lower city, but now they want to infiltrate our sports. Kase sensed Hallie's tense posture. Their home was destroyed, and they have nowhere else to go. Would you rather them drain our near-empty coffers? Near empty? Hallie asked, her voice strained. Kase kicked himself. Even Jove looked at him accusingly, though he swayed a little. When will this dinner be over? Anderson cut in. But this new deal with Tev Rubica should help. I don't trust the Yalvs one bit, and no matter what the Stradat Lord Capitan says, I doubt they're truly on our side. They disappeared for 20 years and expect us to welcome them back with open arms? Please. Kase swallowed hard, but it was the clatter of Hallie's spoon against the delicate bowl that distracted him. Her voice was low. You have no idea what they've been through. I didn't mean to offend, especially as I have a bit of Yalvin blood myself, back a few generations. Anderson raised his hands. But I'm doing what's best for my constituents. We're having enough trouble with the Rubicon refugees. That's why I'm excited to be on the council. I can make a difference in people's lives. Except you aren't even, Hallie growled, but Kase put a hand on her forearm. She stopped mid-sentence, her breathing coming fast. Kase plastered on the politest smile he could muster. The chocolate mousse is absolutely delicious, and it would be a shame to let it go to waste. Kase's hand slid down Hallie's arm and gripped her hand. It was small and a little warm, fitting perfectly in his. He gave it a squeeze before letting go. With a slow breath, she picked up her spoon again. The others followed suit, and Kase was glad for this particular silence. It wouldn't be much longer now. They only had to make it through after-dinner drinks, and then Kase was free. He'd thought he might enjoy one of these dinners. He almost chuckled to himself at the irony. Once all the guests had finished the dessert course, Kase led Hallie back into the parlor where more servants poured steaming hot coffees and after-dinner drinks. Conscious of the alcohol thrumming in his veins, Kase opted for a coffee. Hallie followed suit. She took the dainty cup and saucer and added a dash of cream to it before migrating over to his mother's figurines. Kase popped a few sugar cubes into his cup and joined her. Kase was about to ask about her work when her eyes widened slightly. He peeked over his shoulder to see the Rubicon ambassador heading their way. The man had a proud look about him in the way he thrust his chest out with each step. His bald head reflected the light from the chandelier, and his nose was short, ending too early to seem natural, but it was his eyes that were most disconcerting. They were two different colors, the right one blue as the summer sky, and the left a dirt brown. Kase set his coffee down on his saucer. "Ambassador?" he greeted. The man's conflicting eyes brightened as a smile spread across his face. "Young Master Shackley, I presume?" "Yes, I'm Kase." Of course, of course. You look extraordinarily like your father did when he was younger. I've known him since we were about your age." Kase's nostrils flared as he gripped the handle of his coffee cup tighter. Hallie stepped in, laying a hand on his upper arm, both calming him and releasing a handful of butterflies in his stomach at the same time. "It's so wonderful to meet you, Ambassador Crozier. My name is Hallie Walker. I was a student at the university, and I wanted to say I appreciated your lecture last spring about Rubicon economic policy." The man's face split into a wide smile that reminded Kase of a perfectly cracked egg. "I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Economics has been a long-time passion of mine, and with our challenges with the Civil War, it was interesting to see the shift in various markets." Hallie's hand left Kase's arm, and it felt cold without it. Kase gulped his coffee to clear his head as Hallie continued. "I was able to do a deeper study on it using the book you wrote about the scarcity of metals and the effect on war itself. My professor even, well, he was extraordinarily pleased with my research. I owe you half my good mark." The man chuckled and tipped his head. "You're too kind. Miss Walker, wasn't it? Yes. Now, if you found that interesting, I'd recommend reading Defortier's Conjunction of Conflation. A riveting read." Kase very much doubted that. He set his coffee on a nearby shelf next to a tome with the title, The History of the Three Earths, How Three Peoples Found Safety on Yalvara. His head was still fuzzy. Ambassador Crozier leaned in, his smile growing wider. "I'll let you in on a little secret of mine, dear, if you'd allow me." "Of course." Kase shifted his weight to his other foot. As much as he enjoyed reading, he had never found economics all that engaging. In fact, it reminded him of days spent doodling on spare parchment at the back of his class, while the upper schoolmistress's nasally voice threw out inane terms like supply and demand. "My next book is going to dive into the ancient trade practices of the Yalvan nations." Cold adrenaline spiked in his chest at the statement, but Hallie's eyes glowed. Her words came out in a rush. "I find the Yalvs and their history most fascinating. When are you expecting the book to be finished?" The ambassador took a sip of his brandy. "Within the next year. I've been working with Lord Salder, but he hasn't been as forthcoming as I would have hoped. To think the Yalvs have appeared after so long in hiding? The questions I have." The smile on Hallie's face slipped slightly. Like Kase, she was probably remembering the horrific months they'd spent on Tassava trying to find the Yalvs. "It's fascinating, isn't it?
I'm thankful the watch has allowed me to aid Lord Salder in acclimating them to Jaydian society."
The ambassador tipped his head.
"Yes, you have done a fine job from what I hear."
Hallie beamed. Crozier leaned in.
"My dear, I don't mean to be so forward, but I must ask, your eyes, they are a remarkable shade of brown, almost golden, really."
Hallie's breath hitched. The ambassador's question evoked a snippet of a memory in Kase's mind. A metal door and a smear of golden light, bright as a lantern near where the handle should have been. The image was gone as quickly as it had come. He strained to remember more, but all he could visualize was the door and the glow.
"Yes,"
Hallie said, her voice quivering slightly and almost imperceptibly.
"My eyes remind me of the color of honey, but that always makes me think of food, and then I inevitably get hungry. I blame my mother for my outrageous sweet tooth."
Her laugh was strained, and Kase glanced at the ambassador. The glimmer in his mismatched eyes wasn't one of mirth. Kase's heart skipped a beat. He was formulating a plan of escape when Jove stumbled into him.
"Jove?"
he hissed, holding his brother up by the shoulder. Shucks, he'd never seen Jove this drunk. In fact, once upon a time, Jove barely touched the stuff. But that was before Kase had returned with Zeke's body in tow.
"You're causing a scene."
The ambassador excused himself and strode away. Kase didn't know whether to feel relieved or not. The bittersweet tang of alcohol met his nose as Jove burped into Kase's face. Hallie caught Jove's other arm.
"Here, let's have you sit."
Jove refused to budge. He pressed his nearly empty glass of golden brandy to his lips, but Kase snatched it out of his hand.
"You've had enough."
Kase glanced over to where Clara conversed with his mother and High Guardswoman Hetty Coppen.
"Help me get him to that couch there,"
Kase told Hallie, pointing to one nearby. She nodded and tugged on Jove's arm, but he was an immovable weight.
"Jove,"
Kase growled.
"What in the blasted holy moons and stars is wrong with you?" "I really like brandy."
He stumbled through the last word. Hallie tugged on his arm again, and finally Jove followed. Kase steered them to the couch, which Jove fell into gracelessly. Kase ran a hand through his hair, his fingers catching on the waxy texture once more.
"Blasted product, never again."
Kase stared down at his brother's bloodshot eyes and groaned.
"You can't keep covering up what's really bothering you with alcohol."
"Rather rich coming from you,"
Jove barked, and Hallie flinched. Kase winced and peeked around the room. It had gone silent. Kase shushed his brother, but he wasn't ready to be silenced.
"I will do what I want, no—"
Kase clamped a hand over Jove's mouth, the days-old stubble rough underneath his palm. After a few tense moments, chatter filled the void once more, and Kase relaxed his grip on Jove's mouth.
"Hallie,"
Kase whispered. She bent down to his level, the lace and gossamer material of her dress rustling.
"Would you fetch Clara?"
She was off, with a swish of her skirts. Kase glanced around again, and his heart hammered in his chest when he made eye contact with his father. When Harlan excused himself from his conversation, ice flooded Kase's veins. He fisted his hands in Jove's suit jacket, trying to lever him off the couch.
"Come on, you need to go home. Now."
Jove stumbled to his feet at Kase's urging. Harlan was only a breath away when Jove's voice rang out again through the parlor.
"You!"
Kase paused and shut his eyes tight.
"Not here."
Harlan's voice was low and authoritative.
"I will not have you make a scene. Leave."
Kase prayed to whoever might have been listening, but it was useless. Hallie and Clara joined them as Jove spat out,
"It's your fault Zeke's dead. All your blasting fault."
Spittle flew from Jove's mouth and landed on Harlan's pristine military jacket. He rarely wore anything else. His father's eyes were harder than diamonds. Kase pulled Jove away and turned to Clara.
"Take him home, will you?"
"I command you to—"
Harlan started, but Jove was too far gone.
"You wanted them to die. All you care about is your pride, your title.
Clara stepped in between Jove and Harlan, and Jove, in his drunken state, shoved out, trying to get at his father. Hallie gasped, and Kase lunged, but it was Harlan who caught Clara before she fell to the stone floor. Clara murmured a thank you, but it was drowned out in Jove's sobs, now bubbling out and overtaking his anger.
He was my best friend, and you took him from me. You did this.
Kase flinched when Harlan's hand clenched as if he was about to land a blow to Jove's jaw. If the guests hadn't been there, he would have. He tugged harder on his brother. It was easier now that Jove's tears came freely. Kase gritted his teeth against the pain in his own chest. He understood Jove's anguish more than anyone, but the look in Harlan's eyes... Come on. Jove followed, still yelling accusations. Clara grabbed her husband's other arm.
Love, please, calm down.
Her voice was thick with tears. Kase finally got Jove to Avery, who was waiting in the motor coach. His drunken brother slumped over against the far window. Kase was about to help Clara in as well, but she bent over her stomach, sucking in a breath.
Clara?
After a moment, she stood and put on a pained smile.
Just a forced contraction. I promise. The midwife said it was normal.
Kase shook his head.
I don't know much about stuff like that, but I wouldn't say that was normal.
She held up a hand.
It's all right, Kase, I swear. I'll take Jove home and rest. The excitement tonight was a little too much.
All right, Kase said, swallowing another argument. Send word if you need anything. Clara allowed Kase to help her into the motor coach. He told Avery to make sure Jove and Clara got home safely. As the motor coach trundled down the lane to the gates, Kase plucked up the courage to go back inside. Hallie was still in there, at the mercy of his father. He'd go in and collect her, then walk her home or call another motor coach out for hire. Anything to make this nightmare of an evening end. His polished shoes pattered up the stone steps and through the foyer. Jove's words echoed in his head. You wanted him to die. He was my best friend. Kase blinked rapidly, trying to get rid of the tears pricking his eyes. In his mind, Zeke was falling again, and the puddle of blood beneath his body just grew and grew. Kase clenched his jaw tighter. Keep it together for a little while longer. As he approached the parlor, he looked up, and his heart nearly stopped beating right then and there. Harlan stood in front of the closed door. With a flick of his head, he gestured toward his study. Kase's stomach churned, but he followed his father down the short hallway and into the room. Better me than Jove. Chapter 9. Thank you. Hallie. Steam no longer rose from Hallie's porcelain cup of coffee. During Jove's outburst, she'd forgotten it until she found herself alone by the tiny glass figurines. She eyed the door, praying Kase would come back soon. He hadn't. The Stradat Lord Capitan had slipped out a few minutes ago, and from her limited experience, that wasn't a good sign. But what could she do? Hallie brought the cup to her lips and took a tentative sip. Ugh! She spat as she put the coffee back down onto its saucer, then blushed as a few of the nearby guests glanced at her. She gave them an apologetic smile. You'd have been better off with a brandy. None of these people know how to make a good batch of coffee, a gruff voice said to her left. Hallie looked over to find a hawkish woman with her steely gray hair slicked tightly back into a bun. She wore trousers instead of a gown, and her shoulders told Hallie she wouldn't have needed help lifting the barrels of ale at the inn. She also didn't wear any sort of belt around her waist. Hallie smiled demurely. I hate cold coffee. It's worse than cold tea, even. The lady snorted. Agreed. My name's Hetty Carpin, High Guardswoman of the Watch. We met when you gave your report after returning from the Yalv mission. She held out a hand, and Hallie took it, giving it a firm shake. Hallie was a little taken back by the gesture, as it wasn't too common among the upper class. A proper peck upon a lady's hand by a gentleman, or a small dip of the head, were more the style. However, the handshake reminded her of home, where there were no class distinctions based on wealth. She swallowed to hold back her emotions. How silly of her to nearly tear up over the simplicity of a handshake. "Of course," Hallie said, hoping the thickness in her voice wasn't noticeable. "I apologize for not saying something earlier. When we gave the report, I was a little distracted." "You've been through the blasted fires and back. I don't blame you." She shook her head. "But that's not what I came to talk to you about. Well, not really. I wanted to thank you for your work with the Yalvs in the city." "Oh," Hallie said, brightening. "That's no trouble at all." The woman shifted her weight. Her shoulders dropped a little. "We've had our hands tied with Cerulene, so you working with Lord Salter has been helpful. How do you feel they're adjusting?" "Wonderfully, considering what they've been through. Most of them, that is. Jira, the wife of one of the lords who—" Hallie thought back to Salter's brother Rodder and his fate. What had happened to the sword in the attack? Ben had flung Rodder into the gate using the power as an essence to summon a sword, the one that had pierced Kase and favored the others Hallie had found in the forest temple. He didn't make it to Kaivenna. Anyway, Jira was telling me the other day that she and several of the women are interested in finding work in the tailor shops. She's an excellent seamstress, from what I understand. I feel horrible for what happened, but I'm glad I've been able to help." "Of course." The High Guardswoman knocked back her brandy. "Between you and me, I'm even happier to hear it, as their presence has been a thorn in the High Council's side ever since they arrived. I've been trying to talk down the Stradats, but without Jove there, well, it's been an uphill battle." Hallie wondered if the alcohol had loosened the woman's tongue. Her words felt too much like a national secret. Hallie shouldn't be privy to whatever it was the High Council discussed, though it did set a small spark in her blood. It's not their fault they had to flee their homes. They didn't have anywhere else to go. "I know, but I do understand Stradat Sarson's point about the economy being affected by the influx, small as it is. She worries they might start taking the jobs away from those who need it in the lower city, and while that may be true, we should welcome those who are willing to work." A crimson haze crept in at the edges of her vision. She took a few deep breaths to calm herself before she spoke. It wouldn't do to cause another scene there in the parlor. "These people lost everything they'd ever known, and I'd say the powers that be should appreciate that the Yalvs will no longer drain the government's stores if they're able to contribute to society." With a soft chuckle, the High Guardswoman nodded. "You're not wrong, my dear. Now you see what I'm up against." She drained the last of her brandy. "I didn't mean to get derailed. I wanted to say thank you. However, I must get going. I have to be up at the crack of dawn." With a short bow of her head, the woman left. Hallie closed her eyes and calmed her racing heart. Was that what the High Council was currently fighting over? Hallie understood the economic ramifications of refugees draining government resources, but if the Yalvs wanted to work, why would anyone deny them that? Ridiculous blowhards. This is why I never want to go into politics. Not that the High Guardswoman was one of those. She sounded as if she was truly on Hallie's side, or at least acknowledged her viewpoint. She now understood what may have led to Kase Shackley's resignation. Hallie didn't think she would have the patience for such pretentious pomposity. She glanced toward the door once more. Still no Kase. Tapping her nails against the side of her cup, Hallie chewed her lip and looked around the room. She didn't feel like conversing with anyone else, nor did she want the Rubicon ambassador to approach her again. She couldn't pinpoint why the comment about her eyes unnerved her so. Hallie had always thought their golden color was odd, but now that she knew she had Yalvan ancestry, she thought back to the conversation with the ambassador. It had been thrilling to finally meet Gustave Crozier in person after reading his works and listening to his lectures, but there was something about him asking that question that didn't sit right with her. Stars, maybe she was out of sorts after Kase Shackley's outburst. Yes, that's what it was. The guilt of not being able to save Zeke was weighing on her mind, and Anderson Enright had been going on and on at dinner about one world. She was just on edge. Besides, she still needed to talk to her father about her heritage. His failure to respond only caused more anxiety. Hallie needed to move, and do so without the prying eyes of people who could buy stones it 10 times over. Had something happened to Kase? He should have been back by now. As she paced behind a couch with a potted tree beside it, she overheard the conversation of the 2 women sitting there. They didn't acknowledge Hallie, didn't even see her. "And with Lucy Doyle up and fleeing to their country estate suddenly," one of the city councilman's wives said in a hushed voice, her forehead wrinkled with age. Hallie paused. Lucy Doyle. Lucy Doyle. The younger woman with jet-black hair sitting next to her shook her head. "Didn't you hear? She's pregnant, but she's not giving up the father's name. My bet is on a commoner." Wait, could that be... Hadn't Ben said something about a Lucy? Well, bless the heavens. No wonder they sent her to Hampshire, and a commoner. The first one gasped before side-eyeing Les. My guess would have been Kase Shackley because of the way he chased after Lavinia Richter. May her soul rest among the stars. But he's shown up here with that girl. Is he trying to make a statement? Hallie's face flooded with heat. Dark thoughts squirmed through her mind. She found herself hating a dead girl and wishing she hadn't bought this stupid dress. It didn't matter. No amount of expensive lace could make her fit in. Snotty uppities with their gossip and... She set her cup down a little too hard on a nearby shelf and scurried off before she said something she'd regret. The women jumped, but Hallie didn't stay to see whether or not they would apologize. She shouldn't have come. There was a sharp pain in her chest. She didn't belong here. The green-liveried man with a dark, receding hairline bowed as she approached. "May I assist you, miss?" "Powder room?" He walked her toward the door and opened it for her. "Down the hall there," he said as he gestured to the right, past the grand staircase Hallie had descended after that memorable breakfast with Kase and Les. "You should find it on your left." "Thank you." The man bowed and went back into the parlor. Hallie leaned against the wall outside the door. She'd been judged before. She'd been looked down upon so many times she'd lost count, so why did their words make her feel so small? She fingered the bump on her nose. Jack would have known what to do. He always had. She took a deep breath and glanced around the empty foyer. Where had Kase gone? Had he escorted his brother home himself? She wanted to leave. Her chest still felt tight, although the stabbing sensation had dulled now that she was out of that blasted parlor. The only light in the foyer came from the chandelier hanging from the cathedral-esque ceiling. Damask walls peeked back at her as she stepped forward and inspected the portrait nearest the door once more. Kase had his hand wrapped around his sister's. His face and hers showed no expression other than abject boredom. She thought back to her own childhood and clenched her fists into the folds of her skirts. She and Jack would never have stood still for so long. In fact, Jack would have probably thrown a tantrum or intentionally messed up the painting process, to Hallie's detriment. She smiled at the idea. Pulling herself away from the portrait, Hallie returned to the present. Maybe Kase was outside? She eyed the heavy, arched front door. She'd just take a peek. Not long enough to need her cloak and gloves, which were stars knew where. As soon as she took a step toward the door, a dull clatter broke the silence. She jumped and spun, hand over her heart. "Hello?" It came from where the man had said the powder room was. She stared apprehensively down the corridor. It had been a rather loud noise. What if someone had fallen? She went to investigate. The light from the foyer faded. No one had lit the sconces along the walls, and so she traveled deeper into the house in shadow. A new sound met her ears. Raised voices. Light leaked from under a doorway ahead. As she crept closer, the muffled words became clearer. How in the suns is it my fault Jove doused himself in alcohol tonight? Have you lost your mind? Kase's voice was hard and biting. Hallie put a hand to her mouth to trap any sounds she might have made as she stopped at the light's edge. The door was slightly ajar. Kase's words hung in the air for a moment. Hallie had never heard the tone he used, ever, even at the worst. He'd been rude and inconsiderate and angry over the course of the Eudora mission, but those instances paled in comparison to now. The Stradat Lord Capitan's voice was the ice to Kase's flame. He didn't yell. He didn't even raise his voice to anything above normal conversation level, but it froze the air in Hallie's lungs.
The only reason I allowed you on that mission was because your drunkard brother assured me you were the only one who could successfully bring the entire crew back home. He was wrong. You're useless. Zeke was the only one who ever came close to earning my respect.
Like I care about your blasted respect, Kase spat. Hallie shouldn't have been there. She shouldn't be listening in on this. Hadn't she learned her lesson with the gossiping ladies? But her feet refused to listen. It was as if her dainty slippers were full of stone. The Stradat Lord Capitan's laugh was sardonic and had a rough, jagged edge.
It would have been better if you had died instead of your brother, for all the good you do.
Hallie's vision blurred. The words almost sounded like he spoke them from the other end of an abandoned mine. They pierced her chest like a dagger. Oh, Kase. If I could fix it, I would, but you only see. Raw emotion leaked into Kase's voice. You've never seen what's right before you.
And furthermore, your decision-making has only gotten worse.
What in the...
You always knew your marriage would be political, yet you've paraded that girl in front of the most important people on Yalvara tonight. What a blasting disgrace.
Hallie's heart pulsed in her throat. It was one thing for the women in the parlor to think her unworthy. It stung, but frustration was the stronger emotion in that case. To hear this from Kase's father, the Stradat Lord Capitan. Just go back to the parlor, turn around, and whatever you do, don't cry. But she couldn't even breathe. Don't you dare! If Kase's tone had been mere flames before, it rose to a blaze. It scalded and scorched. Each word stoked the fire until the inferno raged. You have no right to say anything about her or anything else in my life. I know what you're doing. I know what the servants are saying. Mother, too. You're a disgusting, blasting helveter who thinks it's all right to sleep around with other... But whatever else he was going to say was lost in the resounding slap of skin on skin. Hallie gasped. Someone spit on the floor. Hasty footsteps thundered closer as she scrambled away, but she wasn't fast enough. The door flew open and banged against the wall. Scarlet blood trickled down Kase's chin from his busted lip. She shook her head. I didn't... But whatever she wanted to say evaporated as she met the Stradat Lord Capitan's steely gaze over Kase's shoulder. He breathed heavily as he wiped his hand upon his military jacket. She shook her head. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to... Before anything else could be said, Kase grabbed her arm and towed her down the hallway. His grip was like pincers, but she didn't stop him. She could tell that he was struggling to hold in the emotions bubbling beneath the surface. Her arm was the lifeline holding him afloat on a raging sea. She peeked back down the corridor, only to find it empty. Kase! He merely shook his head and pulled her toward the front door. Once outside, he let her arm go and commandeered a car. It wasn't Avery in the driver's seat, but Kase didn't care. He helped Hallie in with a sweaty hand, and after giving curt directions to the man, they were off into the chilly winter night. In the darkened motorcoach cab, the silence was loud enough to drown out everything except Hallie's thoughts. As the street lamps flashed at regular intervals on their journey through the upper city, Hallie wished she could close her eyes and forget the pain.
Kase didn't speak. Hallie couldn't blame him.
You always knew your marriage would be political, and yet you paraded that girl in front of the most important people on Yalvara tonight. What a blasting disgrace. The Stradatelord Capitan's voice echoed in her head. He'd said it with such malice, such disgust, as if she were the scum smeared on the edge of his pristine military-style boots. She hadn't grown up in the city, nor did her family have so much money they didn't know what else to do with it. Her parents did well in Stoneses, but that didn't mean Hallie hadn't had to patch her own clothing growing up. Here in the glittering capital city, even with her university accolades, she still wasn't enough. Not enough for her parents, for the Stradatelord Capitan, for Jayde. Not enough for Kase. She swallowed hard against the lump in her throat and inspected Kase in her peripheral vision. You have no right to say anything about her or anything else in my life. Even though the blood had dried on his swollen bottom lip, Hallie blinked back the tears threatening to fall. She clenched her hands tightly in her lap and wished she hadn't left her satchel in the other motor coach, which was stupid because she hadn't been able to draw since returning. But maybe simply holding the pencil would have helped her deal with the anxiety and embarrassment still coursing through her veins. It would also help get her mind off the question that kept coming back up. How often did something like this happen to him? For all her parents' faults, they'd never hit her like that. They'd raised their voices when she and Jack had eaten all the chocolate morsels from the pantry in one sitting. They'd banished her to her room when she'd kicked her brother after some inconsequential argument about who had to sweep up the dining room. They'd nearly forgotten she existed once Jack had died. But they'd never mistreated her in such a terrible, disgusting way. What horrors had Kase faced in his short life? Jove? Zeke? What nightmares had that monster imposed upon them? Because if that happened once, it happened again. And again. And again. She wound her fingers into knots until she could no longer feel them. Soon they turned onto the lane where her apartment was. A few people milled about, mostly heading off to the taverns near the market. Hallie didn't think there were any troops playing at Grieg's that evening, though there might be something this weekend she could badger Ellis into taking her to. She shook her head at the trivial thought. How could she think of a play at a time like this? When the motor coach stopped, Kase ran a shaking hand down his face and exited before leaning down to help Hallie out. She took his slightly clammy hand in hers, enveloping his fingers. He mumbled something to the driver as Hallie stood shivering in the crisp night air. She hadn't grabbed Petra's silk cloak before she left. Blast! She didn't particularly want to go back for it, now or ever. Shackley Manor might as well have been cursed. She and Kase strolled silently along the cobblestone path wide enough for only two. The light from the street lamps hung off the side of the buildings, casting shadows on his features. Hallie shivered again. Without a word, Kase shrugged off his jacket and held it up. Here. Hallie rubbed her arms. No, it's all right. We're almost to my But she stopped herself and cursed softly. My key. I left it in my satchel, and that's in... Kase closed his eyes. Blast. The word lacked its usual bite. Instead, it came out in a way that reminded Hallie of the worn leather of her boots, cracked and weary. I can go get it. Is the car still... She glanced back to where the car had been moments earlier to find it gone. Kase inhaled slowly through his nose. I told him to go back to the manor. I can rent another... No, any spare coppers I had are in my bag. Panic clawed its way up her throat. I guess we can walk back. No, Kase spat. The panic rose even more and bled into irritation. But I have no other way of getting into my apartment. Her breaths were coming faster and faster with each word. She was going to have to walk back alone and possibly face the Stradatelord Capitan at the end of it. Hallie shivered harder, both from cold and frustration, and Kase shoved his jacket in her hands. She pushed it away, but his eyes were hard. "Just take it, will you? And I have some money. I'll lend you a bit, but I'm not going back there." "Fine," she said, taking the jacket and throwing it around her shoulders. Her next shiver was a little less violent, but the stinging bite at the tips of her nose and fingers didn't go away. "Except you can't very well wander around the city this time of night." He fished a silver out of his pocket and held it between two fingers. "Don't worry about me." As another chill raced up her spine and rustled up her skirts, Hallie tugged the jacket closer, but she didn't take the money. His lip looked like it had gotten larger in the minutes they'd been standing there in front of the building. "Kase," he shrugged. "I have enough for a room at an inn." In his button-up, with its overly starched collar tucked over the knot of his skewed tie, he looked exhausted. His eyelids sagged, and the crusted blood of his lip made him look like he'd been in a drunken bar fight. His previously slicked-back hair had liberated itself, and with that image Hallie was transported back to the moments after Zeke sacrificed himself at the entrance to the mountain temple. She could almost hear the pounding of Kase's bloodied fists and feel his wild, untamed gaze. She eyed the silver fiver still in his fingers. The fare was far too much for a simple cab ride. She worked her jaw and looked down at the folds of her dress. The navy color seemed even darker. It reflected the myriad of thoughts weighing on her mind. She peeked through her eyelashes at Kase, his hand finally dropping to his side. "Come on," she said, grabbing the cuff of his sleeve. "What?" She dragged him behind her, and he stumbled a little before pulling out of her grip. "Hallie, what are you doing?" "I know a good inn with the best breakfast spread. It's a fair price for a couple rooms." "But your key?" She stopped and turned, looking him straight in the eyes. The cool light from First Moon mixed with the dim street lamps and warred on his face. "I'll collect my things in the morning. We're both exhausted, and I want to make sure you're somewhere safe." A low growl erupted from his throat. "I don't need your pity." "I know," Hallie said. "I know you don't want my pity nor my help, but what kind of person would I be if I left you now?" Kase's stare was hard as mountain stone. His nose was pink from the cold, and his face nearly as pale as the Narden's first snow. He didn't move for a good minute, long enough for a few stray flurries to traipse by on the subtle wind. At last he sighed. "Fine." Hallie led them down the street and along a bridge that spanned the Rigamon, a rivulet trickling down from a source somewhere up in the hills. It wasn't much more than a glorified creek, but Hallie had always thought it pretty with the rows of leafless oaks standing sentry on its banks. With the newly fallen snow, the scene looked like a winter wonderland. At least, that was one good thing about tonight. On the other side of the bridge, Hallie pushed open the door to the Crown Haven Inn. Even at this late hour, the dining room was bustling. She hoped Noel didn't ask her to help. The fiddler's drinking song warbled over the murmur of patrons tightly packed against each other in the limited space. The music was a mountain reel Hallie had danced with Niels a lifetime ago. It was a jumble of short and snappy notes flirting with longer trills that rose until the fiddle ran out of breath. Then it jumped quickly into the next line. A good many men and women were dancing, their smiling faces a contrast to the guests sipping expensive brandy at Shackley Manor. Kase avoided the middle of the room, weaving his way along the edges toward the bar where Noel was pouring ale. Hallie followed, apologizing whenever Kase bowled through someone without a thought. She gritted her teeth but didn't correct him. He was already on edge. Thankfully, the other patrons were too preoccupied with the evening's entertainment to care. "2 rooms, please," Kase muttered as he slid a gold tenner across the bar top. Noel's eyes were as wide as tea saucers. He took the money and shook his head. "That's too much, sir. I couldn't in good faith take that sum from you. Besides, I've only got my smallest rooms left. Nothing but a washstand and cot." Hallie sidestepped a dancing couple and smiled up at her employer. "It's all right, Noel. Just got locked out of my apartment. We'll take 2 rooms, and I'll fetch us breakfast from the kitchen in the morning. I'm sure the gold tenner will cover that and help you pay the license fee." Noel set down his rag. You know I'd let you have the rooms free with all you do around here. Besides, that license fee is already paid.
Hallie smiled wider. Just take the money. I know you've given away too many free drinks tonight as it is.
Noel chuckled and bent below the bar. Hallie glanced over at Kase, who'd been silent throughout the entire exchange. Whether the toll of the night would come out through his temper was to be determined, but she didn't want that happening there in front of the fiddler, who had just finished the reel and began to play her father's favorite drinking song. If they didn't get to their rooms soon, she might join Kase in his breakdown. Noel slid 2 keys across the bar top and scooped up Kase's tenor. Up the stairs to the top floor, last 2 rooms on the right. I'll tell Maisie to have cinnamon buns ready at 8 bells. He pulled a folded bit of parchment out of his back pocket. This came with the evening post. Urgent. Said they also sent a copy to your apartment. Hallie furrowed her brow, but grabbed it, both keys, and Kase's arm. Thank you. See you in the morning. Avoiding the people who had started a jig to the rousing chorus of the drinking song, Hallie led Kase to the back stairs. They climbed without incident, and with each successive floor, the raucous dining room noise grew fainter until it was barely perceptible. The upper floors of the inn weren't updated quite yet, and solitary candles flickered in the sconces along the walls. A bit of wax dripped to the dusty wooden floor from the nearest one. Hallie bit back the sting of nostalgia. Stars. She needed to keep it together. Her legs were leaden as she approached the final 2 doors. She stuck the key in the nearest one. The lock clicked. She stepped back and handed the key to Kase. I'll take the one on the end. Kase stumbled forward, his hand falling on the doorframe. The key scraped against the wood as he half-turned. Hal, I'm sorry about what... But tears choked the words like thorns. They leaked from his eyes, his lashes clumping together as he sucked in several breaths. Hallie's own eyes burned as she caught him by the arm and guided him into the room beyond. She kicked the door closed with her foot. Nearly tripping over her skirt at least twice, she finally got him to the small cot where he collapsed, his hands hiding his face as more sobs racked his body. I'm sorry. I'm so... Hallie lit the gas lamp beside the bed and tucked her own key and the telegram into the pocket of Kase's jacket. She didn't want to take it off just yet. Turning back to him, she wiped her stray tears away and fiddled with the cuffs. What could she do? Leave him to his own misery while she listened to his sobs through the thin walls? Staying was all she could think to do. The key fell from his hands and clanged against the floor. She fetched it and laid it on the small, crooked wash-basin stand. There was a rough rag next to the wash-basin. Hallie dipped it in the stale water and wrung it out. She tiptoed over to the bed and lowered herself down onto the cot next to Kase. She hesitated, working up the courage before pulling away his hand. Here, let me clean your lip. I'm fine. She tightened her grip. Just be still, would you? He closed his eyes and his muscles relaxed. She tentatively dabbed the damp rag against his busted lip. His breathing evened out as she wiped away the dried blood. She was careful not to press too hard lest it hurt him. When she finished and rinsed out the rag, he finally opened his eyes. They were still wet with tears. She knotted her fingers together as she stood before him. I don't know what to say, really, but I wanted to thank you, for what you said, and... The words were too thick for her throat. After a moment, Kase patted the space next to him on the cot, and with slightly shaking knees, she joined him once more. She could feel the heat of his body through the hair's breadth between them. Hallie stared at her hands clasped in her lap. She didn't know how long they sat there, but it was long enough for the oil in the lamp to burn out, leaving only the soft glow from the street lamps outside. Hallie stared out the small window at the city skyline. Even from here she could make out the glittering dome of the Jayde Center, shining like a beacon in the night. It made her think about what she'd learned from Anderson Enright. Petra's fiancé was an interesting specimen, and she was sure he and her friend would get along. They both had that air of superiority, though Petra's was more innocent and naive. Hallie sometimes wondered why she and Petra were such good friends when they were total opposites. But then she remembered that fateful first day at the university, when, in biology, she and Petra had been paired up as unwilling lab partners. The professor had assumed they'd want to be friends simply because they were the only two girls in the class. Hallie smiled at the memory. Both she and Petra had refused to dissect the frog laid before them and had gotten a failing mark. Hallie thought it was disrespectful to the frog, while Petra had simply been disgusted. They then commiserated together at one of the tea shops after class, thinking of all the ways they could get their professor fired. Juvenile, but it had made them feel better. They'd started studying together, and eventually worked up the courage to dissect the next poor creature in class. They'd received perfect marks, and had been the best of friends ever since. Hallie hoped Anderson would make Petra happy. She deserved it, 3 times over. But it was his words, or dare she say even disdain, for the Yalvs that bothered her. She understood his point, but that didn't mean it was right. The refugees had made so much progress it was astounding. Surely everyone would stop seeing them as a threat soon. Lost in her musings, Hallie flinched when something hit her shoulder, but it was only Kase's head. He was fast asleep. Her heart fluttered. She remembered when he'd come into the bookshop for the first time. She'd been so rude, even though she was loath to admit it. Her cheeks burned at the thoughts she'd had toward him then. How arrogant he was, how privileged and haughty his words had been. Yet behind all the thorns he was just a boy, abused by the man who was supposed to love him most, and a boy who was unsure of the world and his place in it. She rubbed her eyes. It was too late if she was waxing poetic in her head. With the care of one of the beast tamers at the city menagerie, she eased herself off the cot and laid him gently down. She couldn't very well stay in the same room, and now that her adrenaline had finally calmed, she was about to fall asleep right there. Thankfully, he only mumbled sleepily. His busted lip was prominent against the rough-spun pillow, but it didn't seem to be bothering him now. Hallie eyed his feet hanging off the end of the cot. Too tall. She slipped off his loafers and set them under the cot. She then tugged out the folded blanket from under his feet and spread it across his prone form. In sleep, he looked so incredibly innocent, the pain from earlier erased. For that, she was grateful. He deserved to sleep so soundly and forget the world for a short time. She wished she could be so lucky. Tonight, her nightmares would return, and she was certain the Stradatlord Capitan would join the ensemble cast with his dead son and her dead brother. She tugged at her dress sleeves. She was about to turn away when Kase grabbed her wrist. She let out a soft squeal of surprise. "Wait," Kase mumbled, the pillow muffling his voice. She could barely discern the word. Hallie looked down at his fingers around her wrist, his calloused fingertips catching on the lace extending from the dinner jacket sleeve. She knelt down beside him to find his blue eyes peeking out from half-closed lids. "What is it?" she whispered, as his hand fell away and dangled off the edge of the cot. He blinked blearily. Hallie sighed. "Kase, rest. I'll see you in the morning." When he didn't respond, she rose to her feet. She tiptoed toward the door, trying to keep the floorboards from creaking. "Thank you." Hallie's hand was on the knob, but she turned back. Kase's eyes were open once more, and her heart wrenched at the depth of his gratitude. He wasn't simply thanking her for putting him to bed, or for making sure he had a blanket to sleep under. She blinked hard and tucked his jacket closer around her shoulders. "You're welcome." And with that, she left, shutting the door softly behind her, her heart filled with warmth. Chapter 10. Blasted Lord Pilot. Hallie. Come home. Need to talk. That was it. That was all the telegram said. The only words she'd heard from her parents in months. Her mother must have sent it. Papa was always one to use more words than needed. He did run the inn and had to converse with all sorts of people. He also helped the town medic when the man was overloaded, which happened more often than it should. That's why Jack had been the one to get the funds for university. Her brother had planned to learn medicine and the healing arts properly. But then he'd died, and neither the medic, her pa, nor Hallie could save him. Hallie woke to knocking on her door. Well, not really. She'd been in and out of sleep all night long after opening the telegram. It didn't help that the smallest rooms at the Crown Haven Inn had the most uncomfortable cots, and it wasn't the best idea to sleep in a fancy gown. With each successive knock, she grumbled and stumbled from the cot, nearly tripping over the long skirts. She turned the knob and peeked out through the crack. It was Maisie. "Oh, good, chose the right door," she said, as Hallie opened the door a little wider, letting her inside. She carried a bundle of clothing in one hand. "Noel said you were up here, and in a fancy ball gown." She looked around the room. "He also said something about a gentleman with a busted lip." "It's not what you think, and we did get 2 rooms." Heat scorched across Hallie's face. Maisie cackled and held up the bundle. Her eyebrows rose as she caught sight of Kase's jacket slung over the end of the cot. "Either way, I brought some extra clothes in case you didn't want to wear that fabulous dress into town." Her fingers brushed over the lace at Hallie's wrist. "Nothing happened." Hallie grabbed the clothes from Maisie's outstretched hand and clutched the bundle to her chest. "Thank you for the clothes." She opened the door once more, and Maisie took the hint, but the woman turned before she went over the threshold, a wicked grin creasing her features. "Noel also said the lad was quite the looker." "Bye, Maisie," Hallie said through gritted teeth. Hallie shut the door with a snap, but not before she heard the woman's laughter and a muffled, "See you this afternoon." Right. Because even after everything that happened last night, Hallie had to work the dinner shift. Which meant she needed to retrieve her satchel from Shackley Manor. She changed quickly. Maisie had lent her a wool-spun dress that would have fit the older woman nicely, but it swallowed Hallie whole, particularly in the chest area. Well, it was better than wearing the must and expensive evening gown while walking to the upper city. As she grabbed Kase's jacket and slipped into the corridor, she peeked at his door. Probably still asleep. She would bring up a couple cinnamon buns. And coffee. She definitely needed coffee. The kitchen of the Crown Haven Inn was bustling in the early morning hour. Maisie whisked something in a bowl while Noel ground coffee beans. The cook girl prepped vegetables and the dishboy pumped out a tub of rinse water while flirting with one of the serving maids. Hallie spotted a plate stacked with hot, fresh cinnamon buns. Waving to the others, she raked 2 onto a plate and poured 2 cups of steaming coffee. Maisie gave her an appraising look, which made Hallie blush before she went back up the stairs, balancing the plate of buns on one of the mug rims. Nodding to a few early risers on their way to breakfast, she finally made it back to Kase's door. The door looked like any other in the inn, but it still judged her. It reminded her of the terrible evening the night before, all the words she didn't say, the argument she'd overheard, even the accusations Jove Shackley had flung at his father in a drunken rage. She knocked with the outside of her foot. Both she and Kase needed to devour these cinnamon buns for their own sanity. Within a few seconds, the door creaked open. Kase's eyes were red and puffy, his lip bruised. His hair, still slick with gel, stuck out at odd angles. His tie and shirt were rumpled and askew. Stars, she'd never seen him like this, even in the week after Zeke died. Hallie held up the mug without the plate resting on top. "Coffee?" Kase rubbed a hand down the side of his face and opened the door wider. Hallie took that as an invitation and strode inside. He shut the door behind her and moved the twisted blanket from the cot, bunching it into a ball near the pillow. Thanks, he muttered as he grabbed a mug and took a seat on the cot. Hallie followed suit, setting the plate of buns and his jacket between them. She took a long sip of the hot liquid. It warmed her from the inside out and cleared the fog in her head. Sorry to wake you so early. Outside the snow-clouded window, pink fingers stretched across the lightening sky. Kase took a bite out of one of the pastries. The only sounds in the room were sipping and crunching, but it was far from peaceful. Without meaning to, Hallie had wandered into a part of Kase's life that he'd tried to hide for so many years. She had trouble swallowing the next sip. It was like the guilt had consolidated into a single mass in her throat. Kase finished his pastry and wiped his fingers on his dark trousers, leaving behind powder streaks. He took one last sip of coffee before setting the cup on the warped floor. Hallie traced the rim of her mug with her thumbnail. I need to get into my apartment before work this afternoon, so I'll be heading... He didn't acknowledge her words, only stared at the ground, the non-injured side of his face smashed into his hand. She couldn't see the expression on his face. She continued. I'll have to go by your house this morning, then. I assume you'd still rather not, What I'm trying to say is that if you need me to get anything while I'm there, I can. He looked over at her. His hand, from where he'd been leaning on it, had left his cheek red, which evoked the memory of the theater slap so long ago. She blinked. I'll grab you a change of clothes. Noel will let you stay here for a day or two if you need it. What is it you want to do? When do you have training? Is there a certain book you want me to fetch? Kase's stare was blank. She cradled the mug in her hands and peered into the depths of the murky liquid. He picked at his fingernails. We don't have to talk about what happened last night, Hallie offered, still refusing to make eye contact with him. Unless you want to, that is. I don't. She swallowed. Well, that was the end of that conversation, then. She chewed her lip. Was there anything else she could say to help him? Could she fix the rift that had been gouged by the night before? For once, she hadn't done anything to provoke it. He hadn't either. Stars. Who was Hallie to judge? Hadn't she taken off to Kaivenna after Jack died? She suddenly remembered the telegram. Kase? He looked up at her. His eyes were lifeless. She gave him a half-hearted smile. I have an idea, but before you answer, you have to hear me out, all right? And please say yes. When he didn't say anything, she continued, I won't go into the whole thing now, because it'll bore you to death, and I want you to say yes, but, I mean, if you want to know more about it, I guess I could... She trailed off and cleared her throat. Sorry. I can get carried away. It's okay. His voice was raspy. She set aside her mug. I need to get to Stonesit, and as you're a pilot, I figured that you might, fly me there. I'll pay you, of course. More money out of my school fund, though 50 gold hunders should take me a long way, hopefully. His eyebrows rose into his unruly hair. The Northern Pass won't be accessible right now. I know that. Irritation bled into her voice. She had grown up in the mountains. She was aware of what the pass looked like this time of year. I could find a trapper to guide me. They do it all the time. I paid one a few weeks ago to take a letter through. All I need is a ride to the pass itself. It's dangerous. Please, Kase. Her eyes were burning. I bet you'd do nearly anything to get out of this city after what your father said last night, and I'm giving you the opportunity right now. His nostrils flared as he turned away from her. You shouldn't have been eavesdropping. Guilt brewed like a storm in her stomach. I didn't mean to. I can't just take off into the mountains. That would mean desertion, along with burglary, treason, and a whole litany of crimes. After last autumn with trainee Hickson, I'm walking a thin line. He still can't use his legs. Hallie had heard about that. There had also been talk Hickson was suing the crews. Hearsay, but the papers thought it was good fodder for the society section. But I'd pay you. With war on the horizon, pilots only fly government officials anywhere. That's it. So no, you can't just pay me. And as much as I would love to leave this blasted city behind, it's not possible." His words hit her like a ton of bricks, which made her blood heat even more. "Cerulene attacked near Stoneset, so it's not such a far-fetched idea that something could have happened to my parents. The telegram I received from my family sounded serious." "Jove said Achilles took care of the force. Everything's fine. You're overreacting." "I am not overreacting." She stood, her foot knocking over her mug. It was only a quarter of the way full, and a trickle of black liquid spilled onto the floor. "Fine. I'll find a different way. I was trying to help. Never mind. You wouldn't understand." She swiped the other cinnamon bun from the plate and stormed towards the door, ignoring the spilled coffee. Stuffing the pastry into her mouth, she wrenched open the door and slammed it. "Blasted Lord Pilot!"